I was working with one business recently, only 12 or 14% of the quotations he put out got a response. It is just the simple act of deciding you're going to measure and follow up. It's made a huge difference. They now get 80% of the orders they send out. That change from 12 to 80 is a massive difference in their bottom line.
Join Panida Wayrojpitak on the Techful Founder podcast. Empower your startup journey as a non-technical founder with actionable insights of successful entrepreneurs. Today, we're excited to have Stuart Webb, a seasoned entrepreneur and business strategist with a background in scientific research and years of hands-on experience in building and scaling businesses. Stuart brings a unique perspective on technology and innovation. He has successfully founded multiple businesses and specializes in helping non-technical founders navigate the complexities of integrating technology into their startups. What are the key steps in your 5-step SysBuy strategy for business growth through technology?
Hi, thanks for having me, Panida. You might imagine I'm gonna come at this as somebody who, as you probably know from my background, is a bit different to others. I started out as a scientist, and as a scientist, I often didn't employ scientific principles to business building until later in my career, after actually the first couple of businesses that really started. And so the foundation of what I do now is actually try and get people to think a little bit like a scientist. So that means building step by step on something. And for me, the very first step on that journey is to make sure that you have a vision. You understand why you have the business in the first place. That's very easy for a lot of people. They'll turn and say, "Oh, I didn't like the grind," or I want more money. But that's not why you get out of bed in the morning. Why you get out of the bed in the morning, if you like, it's why you're going out to play. It's you have to understand what it is you're going to do, which is going to make a difference in the world after you finish with your business. So I'm always asking people, go back to that. What is it, the vision? What is it you want to change? What is it you want to do different to other people? So once you've got that clear in your head, that helps you to do the next step. And the next step is to generate a consistent flow of leads. Now, this is a big thing for a lot of young people, a lot of young businesses, a lot of even experienced business owners still struggle with the idea of actually generating a consistent flow of leads, because you know what happens in these things? We get busy. We get really involved in delivering or whatever, and we forget to go and get new leads in. We get comfortable. So for me, it's about putting in place a process, a system, which generates a consistent flow of leads. And that leads me to the third step on this journey, if you like. The third step is when you've generated those leads, you've normally done it by making some sort of promise to your potential customer. Now, you have to deliver on that promise, because otherwise you're going to have destroyed that value that you started in your first step, which is why you're there to make a difference. So it's about ensuring that what you put together delivers on the experience. If you're one of those people that promises a best-in-class delivery in your marketing, but you then deliver a poor experience, people will look and go, "I didn't get what I expected." Now, as you're developing that in your journey, you're probably going to need a help. And then we get 4. You're going to need help from a team. And I talk about hiring people that you hire for attitude. You hire those people in the right way, build their skills, and you take them with you in your journey. Now, all of that combined together, having got the right team in place, team that will enable you to operate on autopilot so that you don't have to be firefighting, you don't have to be constantly looking after the business. They're doing this for you because they all believe in the vision that you have, because you set it out in step 1. That leads you to a profit momentum, a momentum which is just clearly bringing profit every month. And all you have to do is put together the right dashboards for you to be able to check that profit, and it develops into a really sustainable business. So those are the 5 steps.
I love that. I think having systems in place is one of the main leverage that you can have as a business owner, because especially if you get started with your first company, you wouldn't really know exactly what you're supposed to do, but having something in place and knowing which process you're supposed to move through next is definitely a game changer.
Yeah. And as I say, I was a scientist. Systems, processes that enabled me to repeat experiments again and again were second nature. But when I started my first business, I thought, oh no, I don't do any of that now. I'm now in business. Business isn't about that. It's about doing things, fly from the seat of your pants. You don't need any of that. And it was about the third business that I realized I was trying to scale it to something quite substantial. And it wasn't working because everything was coming through me. It was coming through one of the other founders. It was all slow. Everything kept changing. And I went, hang on a minute. Let's go back to my roots. Let's go back to the thing which I know best. And that is to put in place a series of very steps that we fix and we optimize. And then if we're going to change something, we change only one thing, because within science, we're constantly wanting to change things. We don't see something which fails as a failure, or something which is an experiment which doesn't work. That's just an opportunity to learn a new thing. So I started saying to myself, let's do this like it was a scientific experiment. Let's fix all the variables. Let's make everything standardized. And then if we're going to change, we change one thing and we find out if that's good or bad. If it makes more profit, great. If it doesn't, okay, we'll go back to the old way and we start again. And that's how I started operating. That business suddenly scaled, it exploded. And I went, okay, this is the way we have to do it. And I rolled that out to other businesses I was helping.
So would you say the system works mainly for tech businesses or for other kinds of businesses as well?
No, absolutely. It has to work for tech businesses. Let me give some examples. I'm working effectively now. I am helping three technology businesses. One technology business where it's a software business, which is helping to write software for events and management. And one of the things we talk about constantly is ensuring that we're using agile methodologies. We're constantly thinking about how we ensure that we have the right communication, that we are constantly using the experience of our users to inform the decisions we take. So that's you would expect it is something that a lot of technology businesses do, but we do it from two people who are basically business oriented. I'm not a great technologist, but I know how to do these sort of things. And so therefore we're constantly asking ourselves, how would a user look at this? And then we have to have that conversation and constantly work it from the point of view of getting the technology that's being written in software to actually approach it from that point of view. One of the other businesses that I'm involved in, which is actually a business which is to do with taking energy and making electricity out of wastewater, we're constantly asking the question, if one of our users put this into their system tomorrow, what would they want to see from it? They'd want it to be robust. They'd want it to be something which is easy to integrate with their other electricity generation systems. They want it to be something which doesn't disrupt their day-to-day operation. So you're constantly looking at these things and saying, how would one of our users want this thing to work? And therefore, how do we want to engineer our approach to that in order to be able to make that part of our offering to them? So constantly asking yourself, not what is a great idea, what is a great solution we've got, but what's the problem that a customer we has? How can we approach that problem and solve it for them?
Definitely. So having a very user-centric approach to solving problems rather than just trying to do something new or something shiny, like kind of shiny object syndrome, which entrepreneurs get trapped into a lot.
Yes. Yeah. It is really something which I think is something we need to do more of, because so often we do have that shiny object syndrome. We think to ourselves, this is a great new idea. What can I do to use this? But actually, a lot of the time, we need to understand what it is that somebody has a problem with and just solve that problem. It's a very simple way then of marketing as well.
Definitely. So how can non-technical founders effectively leverage no-code tools to build an MVP quickly?
That's a really interesting one. And I think the first thing starts with, as we talked about that vision, why are you trying to solve this? Because that's going to drive you getting up in the morning, and that needs to drive all the activities you take. And the second thing is really drilling down. People say that and I know this from myself, when it comes to understanding how to really increase the size of business, you increasingly have to focus in on a particular problem or solution that you're definitely trying to solve. I'm trying to help business owners solve the problem of how do they use AI and automation in their business in order for that to be my focus. Okay, you've got an idea. How do you solve a particular problem and really get to know that problem, really get to know exactly how that problem would be best in every situation solved by the thing that you're trying to build. So you may have a really niche way of booking a hotel room, but if you get so good at booking that hotel room that you get lowest price, you get best quality, you get the best value, and the experience which a user really loves, you've got a business. Now, maybe there are a lot of other people that other ideas for how to book a hotel room, but if your way of doing it suits a group of people better than anybody else, that will be really easy to market to them, because you can go to them and say in your marketing, this is the problem I understand you have, and this is how I'm going to solve your problem. Because too often we try and make our marketing too broad. Being specific like that helps people to understand exactly how you're going to solve their problem for them.
Definitely. So really niching down and really understanding the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah. And I come back to the AI and automation driven software that we're writing for events management. There are plenty of event management systems out there. But the one thing that they don't do is when you get into the event, they don't help you to find, say you were in a networking event, they don't find for you or help you to find other people that you believe you would like to have a conversation with. So there's a problem with this stuff. Yeah, it's great for the event organizer. It organizes the event. But as a user, I don't have a great experience because I get into the event and then I've got to think, what do I do next? So we focused on that problem. How do we help users of events, users of networking, to come into that event and suddenly have a great experience because they think, I know exactly who I need to speak to. It's already helped set me up in that meeting. We're going to get together and we're going to talk about these things. Now, as an event manager, you might turn around and go, how does that help me? If it helps you to deliver a greater experience to your users, they're going to want to come to your events more often. So that's how we're helping to solve event managers' problem, by making their event more attractive, because the users of the events really enjoy the experience.
Definitely. So not only just solving the problem, but having a fantastic user experience as well.
Terrific. Absolutely brilliant experience. And that's the way to do it.
Definitely. So can you share a real world example where AI recruitment significantly transformed a business?
Yeah, sure. One of the pieces of software which I've been involved with enables a user to look at a camera, and within about 20 seconds of just capturing some video, it can actually help to understand the personality and understand the sort of way in which that person might fit within a business. We've incorporated that into a recruitment campaign, and we present a report to the recruiting manager, which basically, as soon as somebody comes on to apply for a role, they put in their CV, the camera takes a very short snapshot, asks you answer a simple question about just who you are, and it uses that in order to generate a report which says, you were looking for somebody with the following behaviors and traits. This person has those behaviors and traits, and it highlights that to the hiring manager so that they can rise to the very top of their screening list. They present them with a CV, video, and this report which has been generated, which basically says this person seems to have a something like 80% match. And we've got, out of the 20 people that have applied in the last 4 hours, 3 of them are worth getting in for an interview. You can hit a button at that point and you can go and ask each of those people to schedule a meeting with you in order to start their interview process. Now, that process we had with one of the businesses we're working with used to take 2 weeks, because the CV would come in, somebody would screen it, it would be matched for keywords, somebody would review it, and then they would make a recommendation to the hiring manager in order to get them in for an interview. We've now reduced that to less than a day, and we've now seen that recruitment has become easier for that business, cheaper for that business, but also retention. Because the report is helping them to generate greater understanding of the fit between the candidate and the role they're recruiting for, and because the experience is so easy for the candidate, their retention has gone up. So instead of having to recruit and then recruit again in a year's time, they're now saying recruitment and that candidate stays for longer. So the costs of retaining people has gone down. And that's because technology is now good enough to be able to do this sort of matching, helping to understand how the behaviors, the personality, the traits of that person fit within the culture of an organization. But it doesn't take away the human's ability to make the decision at the end of the day. It just makes a recommendation that says, these are the people you ought to see first.
Yes, this definitely sounds very useful, especially with AI generated CVs and us making it very difficult to see
Yeah.
who is actually qualified.
Yeah, absolutely. And so often the CV is, we all understand how a CV is now written in order to go through the applicant tracking system in a particular
Yeah.
way. You need to supplement it with other technologies which allow you to match the person to the role that you want to do. Now, all of this comes back to the fact that in your business, you need to understand the sort of people that you need, the behaviors that you want to drive. I talked a little bit in my 5-step process about the fact that you need to build the right team. One of the things I talk to founders about is the fact that bringing in technology is not a substitute for actually having the right behaviors and recruiting and ensuring that you keep the right behaviors. And secondly, giving people the right feedback, because the one thing you don't want to do is just allow it to become a technology-driven reporting system or whatever. You still need to talk, you still need to have communication. And if you want to make sure that you have people that are brought in that have technical skills, that's great, but you also have to match that with communication skills. So actually bringing that to your, if you like, to your scope of what you're trying to recruit for, that enables you to be able to build your AI systems, your automation systems, to help you to select the right candidate to come forward for an interview.
Definitely. So this would also mean that those with soft skills are the ones who are more likely to be picked by this AI. Am I correct?
So what we're doing with the AI that I've just described to you is we are actually building that into the AI technology. We're actually helping to build it for the right behaviors and traits. Yes. So if you're looking for somebody that's able to communicate, you have to say to the technology you're using, these are the behaviors and traits that I want to be selecting people for, and getting that the correct selection as part of the process.
Definitely. So what emergent technologies should non-technical founders be aware of in the next 5 years?
Oh, okay. So there are technologies that I'm really aware of. I've obviously talked to you about AI and artificial intelligence and machine learning. Obviously, that's going to be absolutely huge. Processes for enhancing customer experiences and things like that. I'm very aware of the fact that chatbots are now becoming much more tailored. And if you feed them the right data from your database of knowledge, that becomes a much better experience for many users. One of the other things that I'm really looking for is sustainable technologies. One of the things I just said to you, we're looking at the moment at technologies that I think are going to make it easier to generate electricity. They're going to make it easier in order to reduce carbon outputs and things like that. Now, one of the disadvantages of AI and machine learning at the moment is they take up huge amounts of electricity, and that's obviously going to drive up the costs associated with generating electricity. But we have to look towards, as I said, I'm working with a business that's trying to generate electricity from wastewater that's basically coming out of plants that are producing food, for instance. There's huge amounts of electricity that could be generated from that. So we're looking at technologies that do that. We're also looking at other things that are able to do it. The other things that I would really start to look at the moment are things like the Internet of Things. I think the Internet of Things is going to drive us to have greater amounts of data. I've just said, one of the things we need to worry about with AI, machine learning, is the amount of electricity that we required. One of the things that we're looking at is generating electricity, but how do you know how to balance those two unless you've got sensors which enable you to be able to take inputs and say, where should we be generating electricity? Now, it's a great thing that we're starting to get smart grids nowadays. There's smart grids that enable us to, for instance, plug in and take electricity at a time when there's a lot of other people not using it. So we can balance out exactly when we need to use things. But any data that you feed into a system like this, any data that you can take, any information that you can feed into your business through sensors that are on machinery, anything like that, which will enable you to take greater, more proactive decisions, or indeed it to adjust, have got to be able to be a good thing. So I'm watching very carefully on the Internet of Things, sustainable technologies, and some of those AI machine learning, where we're using more and more technology in order to help us do cancer diagnosis, as well as things as simple as a chatbot in a business.
I love that, because I feel like, especially with AI advancements, they're not just here to write out emails, right? They're here to change the world and make us better.
Yeah, I actually wrote about this in my newsletter yesterday, because one of the things that I'm aware of is most people think AI is about writing their blog posts, and it's not. There are huge strides being made in cancer diagnosis because the technology it looks for things that humans don't even see. And on top of that, it's going to be this, the thing that I look at with AI is we should be looking at it as the sort of research assistant that sits alongside us. A radiologist one of those is not going to be out of work. What they're going to do is they're going to have a lot of the pre-screening done by the AI, and then it's passed over to the human in order to make final decisions. At the end of the day, AI should be seen as the way in which a computer was once. It's going to help us do our jobs better.
Definitely. Like a radiologist would just have their agents that they need, and then they'll still be there with their job, just to do it a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. And founders should be thinking like this. Founders should be looking at building these systems and technology and automation into their business from the very beginning. Because
Definitely.
if you're going to build a really scalable business, you don't want to have to rip out a bunch of people that you've employed and then implement technology. You need to be thinking at the very outset, how do I build a really truly scalable business from the outset? How do I enable communication? What do I do from day one to enable the right communication to ensure that people are understanding each other properly? Do I use technology for that, or do I ensure there's a technology supported by people's communication? How do I want to make sure that we've got workflows in place so that the right work is delivered to the right person at the right time? Rather than spending my time doing it without any technology, how do we build that technology into our workflow from the very beginning? How do we make sure that we're actually thinking about what data we're gathering so that we gather the data and we put it in such a format that we can be able to access it later on, rather than having to go through a revision process later? It's one of the things that I work a lot with people on, is thinking through from the very start. How do you ensure that you're not going to lock yourself into work practices, into data practices, which you're going to have to unpick, which it becomes more difficult to do as you start to scale your business? How do you think from the very beginning, right, we are going to think about having a CRM from day one, even if that CRM is potentially more bulky to put into practice from day one? If you're building a scalable business, what you don't want to do is have to rip out a bunch of spreadsheets and written pads and Word documents or whatever else in order to start your process of becoming more digitally aware. You need to put all of that in place to begin with. And I talk to people about doing some of that thinking. I actually speak to them about running small experiments within their business. Okay, see just how much more difficult it will be if you use this technology against this technology, and make a decision now and use those data-driven points in order to make your decisions about how you're going to run your business in the future.
Definitely. So having some like a scientific report after.
Absolutely, yeah. We go back to my first love. Run the experiment. Take the experiment and say, okay, we're going to try this. If I talk a lot to people about running those mini experiments within their business. Try it. Set a time, 2 weeks. Do the experiment for 2 weeks. Work out at the end of it. Measure which one is better. Okay, this one's better. That's the one we're going to work with. But don't put yourself into a situation where when you reach a business you start off with a small business, but you reach 100 million, you've got to start the process all again because you started from the wrong place. Think about what you're going to be when you're a $100 million business, and then think about exactly how you put together all those systems and processes so that when you get to 100 million, the transition to the next stage is so simple.
Like reverse engineering how to get to 100 million. So how do you recommend non-technical founders collaborate with technical teams effectively?
Yeah, if I was a non-technical founder that had to collaborate with an awful lot of technical people as I started my journey. So 2 things. I established from the very beginning very clear communication paths, what we were going to do to communicate with each other, how we were going to do it, when we were going to do it. It wasn't all going to be written. We were also going to introduce verbal, because sometimes as human beings, we misunderstand the written word. So yes, I love automatically driven dashboards. I love automatically driven reports, which enable me to gather a lot of information very quickly. But I still have with my team, even now, 15 minutes in the morning where we talk to each other. Now that talking might now gather around, this is where I need help. And we ask each other, what can I do to help you? But I still think that we need to ask each other that question, because otherwise you'll sit in your office, you'll sit in your cubicle, you'll sit in your bedroom and you won't ask for help. So we talk to each other and we ask help. The second thing that I suggest is we have really clear defined roles and responsibilities. Too often we leave roles and responsibilities being unclear. We like it. It becomes difficult if we have to pin it down. But I think it's really clear that we have to define who's doing what and when. So I actually actively encourage people to think through who's going to be responsible for this, who's going to make the final decision, even if at the end of it, they turn around and go, I need help. Once again, getting the decision made, we have to have clear roles, clear responsibilities. Did I say there were only 2 of these? There are going to be 4, at least 4. I could go on. We're going to encourage cross-functional collaboration. I'm a big fan, and I, once again, learned how to do this. Let's go and meet with people who don't fit and sit with your sort of same thinking. You have to meet with them. You have to talk to them because you have to understand it. So I encourage all non-technical founders to go and try and meet with the technical people to try and understand what they're talking about, but also try and explain to them what you are seeing from where you fit as well. Because once again, we need everybody to understand this. And I'll try and get back to it. Get back to my final one without going on too long. Project management. You might think project management is for the techies, but as a non-technical person, you need to understand some of the concepts behind project management. I went out and taught myself. I went out courses and such to really understand project management. I didn't do it because as building a business, I thought it was the thing I had to do, but I got to understand that because the one thing I recognized and I heard being said to me by a mentor was that, and I can't remember who it was that first said this, but if they had a problem and 24 hours to chop down a tree, they would spend the first 23 hours sharpening the saw. And the reason that was said to me was because I had an attitude very early in my business career where I would say, I don't want planning, I just want to see doing. And people would turn around and say, you don't understand. And so eventually I took myself off to understand. And I realized planning is a bit like that scientific process again. It means thinking things through and establishing a process. And yes, a plan is something which you look at and go, we veered from it. And all I do as a founder is look at that plan and say to myself, I've moved away from the plan. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do I want to be able to use that in order to get back to where we were? Or have I realized that the plan was never good and it's changed, so we'll just draw up a new plan? I use it as a way of helping to guide me to make a decision. And that's all a plan is. It's just a tool that enables you to make a plan. So to make a decision, have really clear roles and responsibilities. Think through who's doing what. Make sure you're really clear about communication. Who's going to say what to whom? How are you going to do it? Make sure you keep talking. And I would say learn, especially try and take yourself down, learn some basic project management, learn how to put together the steps that you need to take. Because if the plan doesn't work, no plan ever works. It's not important that the plan doesn't work, but use it to decide, oh, we've gone off course. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And that's all you have to do with a plan. Look at it and go, we're off course. Am I happy about that or am I not happy? If I'm not happy, do something about it.
Definitely. Yeah, because I think a lot of people see these like business plans as quite inflexible, but they don't work in a startup environment. So there's this feeling like, why should I even have a plan? But of course it is going to change. And just like you said, you can completely just change the plan.
Yeah, a plan is not something which you should look at as, I'm going to never deviate from it. All you use is to say, we've discovered some new information. We might use that new information. Or we've discovered some new information. Let's go back to the drawing board. It just helps you to make a decision.
Definitely. So what role does digital strategy play in scaling a startup, and how can founders develop one without a tech background?
So I think digital founders have to use a strategy. Now, I talked to you just a moment ago about the fact that something like a CRM is absolutely critical. Now, you may not get the very best CRM, but the one thing that you can say is, I want to have something like clear communication with my customers and I need to know everything about them. So understanding what you want to do, at least in the early days, is enough to help you make some early decisions. Now, you may not understand all of the technologies you're going to need. You may not understand all of the data you're going to collect. But starting out with what might I want to do in 6 months, a year's time? For instance, I was talking to a business owner and I said, are you ever going to be looking and saying, I need to be able to automatically respond if somebody comes onto my website? And they said, I don't think so. And I said, and how certain are you that might not be where you are in a year. And they went, oh yeah, in a year's time, I could well be there. So I said, so start today to put together the technology that you need in order to do that, because it will be too difficult in a year's time to start again. So it's about thinking to yourself, if there's something out there that I might need in a year, perhaps now is the time to investigate, put a little bit of time and effort into it, because it's much easier. So for me, technology and digital strategies are about just maybe putting yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone and thinking, where could this be in a year's time? What do I think I might need in 18 months from now? And putting a little bit of effort into that. Digital strategies, for the large part, are around understanding what you might want to measure and keep as your points of measurement. And if there's no point trying to measure, for instance, how long it takes you to make a widget if you didn't start with measuring from the point at which you get the materials through the factory door to the day it goes out of the factory gate. And if you are going to want to measure how long it takes you to make a widget, start today gathering what happens when stuff comes into your factory so you can start the process.
Definitely. So starting small and documenting those processes and just implementing a bit rather than making it a really big deal and trying to do everything right away.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just give you an example. I'm working with a business at the moment that has started to document everything. And they've started much later than they're beginning to scale up now, but they've started documenting everything. Two things have happened. The first of which is that they've recognized so much of what they do is not what they wanted to do. So they're changing the way in which they're doing to become more efficient as they're trying to document it and starting to put it into digital systems. The second thing that's happened is the founder has started to recognize just how little there is for them to do, because everybody's doing it brilliantly. So that's enabled him to take his hands away from constantly steering everything and take on new things. He's thinking much more about the future. Where's the business going to be in 5 years' time? Because he's no longer having to be hands-on. So he's suddenly freed up a huge amount of his time to think about what the business should be in 5 years from today. Just two, those are just two outputs of somebody sitting down and saying, let's just start writing things down. And as they do it, they begin to realize that people are much more engaged. They're doing the job. He doesn't have to do as much. And they've suddenly recognized a lot of waste that they've got, so they can remove the waste. The business has become more profitable as a result.
It sounds super simple, right? Just writing things down, but it makes a huge difference.
It's huge. And do you know, the statistics seems to suggest that a business is worth 2 to 3 times more because things are documented than if they're not. So there's a huge advantage when you come to exit your business as well.
Definitely. So what surprising tech strategy do you believe can transform a non-tech founder's business journey?
Do you know, one of the most surprising technical strategies that I found are those simple things to do with measuring. Deciding what you want to measure and why, because that involves you having to collect data, and data enables you to make decisions. Data-driven decisions, absolutely huge. I was working with one business just recently, and we started measuring the response rate to the quotations that they put out. It's not something they'd measured properly before. You might think it's a fairly basic thing, but they were so busy hunting for new leads, putting out a quotation, didn't actually measure how many of those became a reality, led to an order. They've started measuring it. It's a very simple thing. What happened was that they discovered that about only 12 or 14% of their response of the quotations they put out actually got a response. So we started to ask the question, why? So I picked up the phone to a number of the people that had received these quotations and said, what happened? And they said, oh, we loved the quotation, but nobody ever rang us up and asked us what we thought of it. So we just put it on one side waiting. And as a result, nobody asked us. We never actually ordered from you. So I said, why did nobody phone you up? And then we don't know. So I went back to the sales director and said, can you tell me how often you follow up on people that have received one of your quotations? And he went, oh, we don't bother. If they want it, they'll ring us. And I said, no. It doesn't sound very much, does it? But it is just the simple act of deciding you're going to measure. It's the simple act of deciding what you're going to measure and why. So we've now got a system in place which prompts those people to actually pick up the phone and ask the question. It's a very simple piece of technology, but it's made a huge difference because they now get 80% of the orders they send out. And that change from 12 to 80 is a massive difference to their bottom line. What we're doing with technology is we've got to use it to support what we want to get as our outcome. Too often people are putting in technology because they think it's bright and shiny. It's the bright, shiny thing we talked about. What you've got to decide is, what is it you want to do, and how can I use a piece of technology to do that? What can I do to do that? So let me go back to another example. That AI recruitment piece of software that I talked to you about earlier that we put into one business, that was driven because they had a huge problem with retention. They came to me and said, can you help us solve our retention problem? And you have to drive in and go, what's the reason that people are not staying? You may not be gathering the data, but you start them by gathering the data. Once you gather the data, you can see the reason they're staying is because they were missold the job when they started. So how do you manage to match that up? They thought they were coming for one job. The boss thought they were hiring something else. You change the perception. Technology, whatever technology it is, has to be driven from what's the outcome you want to take it. Now, I don't know as I've necessarily answered your question. I've basically given you a non-technology answer, which is make the decision of what you want to measure before you start putting your technology in.
Definitely, I completely agree with that. I think it's the shiny object thing again, because
It is.
there's a new AI tool that comes out every day, and it's so tempting to want to try everything, thinking it will solve your problem. But you only need the ones that truly does solve your problem.
Yeah, you could spend all day, every day changing your CRM, but why?
Definitely. Can you share a personal challenge you faced when bridging the gap between tech and non-tech areas? How did you overcome it?
Okay, my scientific training was in human viruses. I started my work in a hospital. I was researching human viruses, persistent human viruses. But what I saw was a problem where in the hospital, we didn't report results from the virus lab out to patients as easily as we should. So I started asking the questions about how we could make this better. And I came across somebody who thought they could help. And the first thing they said to me was, we need to do this thing about workflow. And I went, okay, tell me about what I need to know as somebody who doesn't understand this to do that. And they told me, and they gave me some resources. And I said, I don't want you to actually tell me. I just want you to point me in the direction of where I can get more information so that I can ask the right questions. For me, that was the eye opener, because I realized that if they told me, I would just sit there and go, oh, great, they've got the problem solved. What I asked them to do was to point me in the direction of the resources that I need in order to be able to ask the right questions. I didn't need to understand it in depth. They were the expert. But I did need to know what questions I needed to answer. Now, they were brilliant in this. And one of the reasons I founded the first company with them was because they were so good at this. They basically turned around and said, no, I'm not going to tell you because why should I? But I will tell you what you need to go away and learn about. And I pointed you in the right direction. So for me, the first thing that I learned was to ask the question, I don't want to get into all of the details. I don't want to get into all of the depths of it, but I need to understand enough to ask the right questions. And so that's always the approach that I've taken since then, which is I may not know everything, but I need to have enough knowledge to ask the right questions so that I can spot if something doesn't quite align with what I believe is the right approach in order to solve the problem I'm trying to solve.
Interesting, because I think a lot of people feel like they need to know everything, but in order to do things, right? But if you just know enough to ask the right questions, I think that's a very good goal to have in terms of attaining enough information in order to take action.
Yeah, because if you're a non-technical founder, you will have technical people working for you. Don't get in their way and try and understand it in the detail they do, because why have you bothered to employ them if you're just going to get in their way and try and do their job? But if you can ask the right question, if you can engage in the conversation, if you can say, wait a minute, I didn't understand that because I understood this to be true and you've just told me this, and X and Y don't appear to be the same. What is different between them? so that you can have an engaging conversation, then you're probably doing what you should be doing as a non-technical founder of a potentially technical business. I have no real understanding of Kubernetes servers, but I know the questions to ask somebody that's about to deploy something on one, to just say, can you just walk me through the process? Because I know the process you should be using. I know enough to ask the right questions so that I could spot if there's something different. And if there is something different, I'm perfectly happy to say that, I always do X at this point. You're now saying to Y at this point. What's the difference between X and Y? Because that doesn't appear to be the same thing. So just have enough knowledge to ask the right question, because otherwise you're doing the job for them. And you didn't employ them to do the job for them. You employed them to be the expert whilst you do the other stuff.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. If it turns out that they've discovered something new, and that's a good thing for your business and great, but if there needs to be an understanding and go back to your process, that works too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what drives your passion for helping non-tech founders navigate tech challenges?
So my passion, as you can probably tell from the way that I get excited about this, is I've been there, I've done it. And so I'm really keen to help other people discover how to do the same thing. When it comes to AI, I think AI automation have huge advantages that can transform the way businesses scale today. So I get passionate about getting people to come out of not asking questions and ask the questions. I get people who come to me and say, teach me what I need to know about this. And I say, the only thing I need to teach you is how to ask the questions of the people that work for you. So I get hugely engaged in getting people to think like a scientist, which is, I don't understand this. I'm going to ask enough questions to be able to design an experiment to test. So I still retain the same enthusiasm, the same wonder at not knowing, and believing that most businesses' problems are not solved by having a flash of genius. It's about innovation is about those experiments. It's about saying, I'm not going to try and solve all of the problems today. I'm going to solve this one. I'm going to move things forward by one. I'm going to ask enough questions today in order to change one thing. I'm not going to try and change everything in one go. So I'm constantly driven by the desire to ask the right question today to move things on tomorrow to the next question.
I love that because it shows that there's no kind of light bulb moment that where you just solve something, but there's a whole process, especially in science, that you came from to innovation. It's not just you just think of something and you're a genius one day.
No, you don't. And there are geniuses. I've worked with some very clever people, but at the heart, we're all the same. We're just there saying to ourselves, I just want to ask the right question today in order to move me forward tomorrow.
That's very simple. I love that. So how has your perspective on technology and innovation evolved over your career, especially as you've worked with diverse founders?
Technology for me is always the way in which we deploy technologies changes. We've gone from the days of writing in COBOL to the days today of basically putting your prompt into ChatGPT and it writes the code for you. But technology has always been about how can I take a problem that I've currently got and make it more accessible, easier to solve tomorrow. We're still asking that, I think, today. We have more problems today because the complexity of what we now understand in terms of data that's coming at us and information, and turning that into useful knowledge that we can use to make a decision is even more complicated today than it ever was. But at the heart of it, the very core of what we're talking about, it's still the same thing. It's still the same. I have got a problem which I need to solve. What is the most effective way of solving that problem as cheaply as I can? And if sometimes we look at a piece of technology and we think that could solve the problem 100%, but it will take me 100 days to implement it. Or here's another problem or another technology that will solve my problem 80% and will take me 10 days to implement it. I still encourage everybody to take the second, because too often we look at an interesting piece of technology and we're convinced it will solve the problem 100%. And we spend so long implementing it that the business has moved. I have spent so many hours and days with founders talking to them about the bright, shiny piece of technology they're trying to implement. and said, but the world will have changed by the time you've got it installed. The world will no longer care about that. And you have got to just take the quick, short solution. So that's where we come back to what I talked about at the beginning, using things like DevOps processes, agile processes, in order to say, how could I turn this around quickly to solve this one problem today that will move us forward tomorrow, rather than looking and saying, I want to solve all of the problems in 6 months, 8 months' time, because 6 months' time, who knows how the political, economic outlook will have changed to make your business even different to what it is today in just a short space of time. We're too often looking so far out, looking towards very distant problems, trying to predict. I work with people who are scaling their businesses, and scaling a business does not mean trying to think about 5 years, 10 years' time. Scaling your business means knowing that in 5 years' time you want to be in a different place and driving in that direction. Scaling that business means thinking about some of the problems you've got today that you need, some of the problems you'll have in 5 years' time, and putting in place the ways that you might solve them. But it does not mean trying to build your business for 5 years, because who knows where your business will be in 5 years. It means building your business for the next 10, 15, maybe 26 weeks. It means starting that process, but not actually slavishly trying to build a business that is going to be in the exact model that you want it to be in 15 years' time.
Definitely. I completely agree with that. So solving smaller problems over a period of time and then just running it like an experiment. And that is yeah,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Solving smaller problems, solve small problems quickly.
definitely. So I think this is a great note to end the podcast on. Thank you so much, Stuart, for coming on the podcast and sharing all your insights with us.
Thank you, Panida.